Welcome to the IVM Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Paodcast, presented by the Daily Pao.
Amit
and Purva,
and we're from a city-specific culture and food website called the Daily Pao, and this is our series of mini episodes called Pao Bites. We run it in the week between our fortnightly podcast, the Paodcast.
On this episode, we're going to be talking about reviewing culture. So Pranati reviews films and theatre, and Amit reviews music festivals and occasionally gigs. So yeah, guys, y'all wanna tell us?
So, Prawn, why do you hate most of the movies that are...
Because most of the movies that I have to watch are Bollywood films, which neither of you want to watch, and the burden is entirely on me.
Are you saying all Bollywood sucks, Pranati?
Most Bollywood, like 99% of Bollywood sucks.
Wow,
and
okay.
I think this is
Wait, let me just go back
all
to...
agree on.
What movie did you give 5 stars from Bengali silent film?
Listen, that film was very good. It was, it was a very interesting film.
Such
and
a typical...
Pranati is like, we said this before, but she's...
On an average,
the
I have to
hater.
watch films like Houseful 3.
Listen, I think the Houseful 3 is so bad it's good. From your review, I felt that
it was not so bad it's good. Welcome is so bad it's good. Welcome, both welcome.
And Flying Jat was neither.
Flying Jat started out in a promising fashion. It didn't take itself too seriously, but then in the second half, it slid.
This is such a subjective thing that we're talking about. What is good cinema, right? I mean, and if you look at it, it's not only in India, it's basically everywhere, even in Hollywood. This summer has been one of those strange summers where a lot of movies that were literally... they were mauled by the critics. Movies like the Superman versus Batman film.
Because it was crap.
But it has done amazingly well. And, So
it really doesn't matter what we have to say about films. Like in India, for example, it really, whatever the critic says doesn't really matter. And I don't think reviews have any bearing on the fortunes of a film. I mean, just look at Salman Khan's films. I think I'm one of the few people that did not like Bajrangi Bhaijaan. A lot of people loved it. I thought it was an awful film. And just look at how well it did. Any Salman film for that matter.
Just to get the conversation back to our reviewing process, we're also picky about which ones we're doing, and maybe we should explain why we are choosing these ones, like how we approach a review, like...
Right. Well, the thing is, since we're a very small team, and since we don't have the resources or the time, more importantly, to go out and review every film that's released.
And also, more importantly, I feel that it's because we look at who's coming to read us for what. Like, we don't cover Bollywood at all. We cover Bollywood films because they are part of, a person's sort of experience at the weekend. And that's a big part of what we do, is telling people, guiding people, recommending what they should do on the weekend or through the week. And I think, therefore, some major Bollywood movies we would sort of review. And also, I think the indie cinema, because that's more, our reader is more interested in that kind of movies.
But as far as Bollywood is concerned, and I mean, Bollywood is something that we do have to mark. I mean, as much as we hate watching Bollywood films, we have to mark them because it's such an integral part of Bombay, and we are a city website. What we've decided, especially recently, just looking at, our viewership trends, we've decided to... review those films we think have a higher possibility of being bad. Because
they're funner to read.
Yeah,
they're more fun to read.
Yeah. It's fun to write the review as well as read the review.
When you talk about sort of mainstream Bollywood, like you were mentioning earlier, I think that even if you take any sort of, even a Shah Rukh Khan film or an Amir Khan film, they are kind of like, they sort of have this immunity, right? Like wherein they're going to be bad, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be flops. So how do you sort of approach something like that? Do you have to look at it from a viewpoint where you think that, or are you judging all films on the same scale, or are you looking at them on a relative basis?
No, I'm pretty much, as far as Bollywood is concerned, I mean, I'm not looking at the films from a relative scale. They're really from the same scale. I mean, Bollywood films, generally, especially these big budget, big studio films, they tend to be extremely populist.
Yeah.
And by and large, pretty bad.
Yeah.
So how does this compare to like reviewing theatre? I mean, because they're so
different,
they're so
especially
different.
in terms of budget. I mean, you have like from no budget to like
and
budget.
is it like a different mindset that you
But
have to go with, or
interestingly,
like
and you can tell us why we've done this, is that we have focused on reviewing the very sort of large-scale productions, mostly the Adiyam productions that have, and those are the ones that have like at least a decent amount of money behind them.
Again, I mean, for the same reason, because we're a small team and we don't have the resources to review every new play that's out there. And Bombay's theatre, I mean, I'm not going to call it an industry because it's not one, but the theatre scene, it's prolific. There are new plays out all the time, and ideally we should be reviewing all of them, but because we're strapped for time and manpower, we review only the big ones, the ones that people are more likely to be interested in.
And also,
but those are also the slapstick ones, right? But those are some things
They're
that
not
you don't
necessarily.
cover.
They're not necessarily slapstick, but they definitely are, like the Adiyam.
No, not the Adiyam, but there are a lot of these Parsi plays or something. Like,
yeah, no, but
Parsi
we've got a lot of
directors.
these smaller theatre groups like UTP and
So if it's a play that's likely to
Motley,
be of general interest, then we will review it. If it's a play that's newsy, we will review it. But a lot of the smaller plays we tend to ignore for purely practical reasons.
Also, you look at it this way: if you are planning a weekend and you want to go and see a play, you at the spur of the moment, unless you're a really big theatre aficionado and you keep track of these things, your likelihood of getting a ticket for a 300 capacity Prithvi show is much less than, say, going for an Adiyam show, which is in a 1,000 capacity theatre, right? Or in a St. Andrews, which is sort of 800 seater, right? And then you read a review and you decide, and I know that some of these plays actually have been pretty big hits. I mean, a lot of people have told me that they really like Loretta, which wasn't a bad play.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad play. In fact, I mean, it's good that you brought up Loretta. One thing that distresses me about theatre in Bombay is how inward-looking it is. And I mean, you guys frequently say that I hate every play that I watch. And this is not entirely true, but it is true to a large extent.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is that I find like a lot of Bombay plays extremely myopic and inward-looking. They're about things like relationships. It's as if playwrights don't read the newspapers. They don't read about what's going on in the country. And this is not how it used to be. Bombay's theatrical heyday was in the 70s and 80s when you had extremely political drama coming out, especially, out of the Marathi theatre scene. But that is not the case now. And this is something that bothers me. Now, Loretta, which you just mentioned, what was interesting, so it was a sort of modern theatre. Theatre is a Konkani theatre form, and in a theatre, aside from the main narrative, you have little side narratives, and these could be sketches, they could be little comedic pieces, gags, etc. And this play was interesting because of these side sketches, and these side sketches, they poked fun at the current political situation. So there was some engagement with what is happening in the country, and I find that this is lacking in theatre in Bombay in general. And even in cinema, I mean, the last few films that I've reviewed, they've all had, these patriotic flourishes that are completely unnecessary. In Dishoom, for example, an awful film, there's, Varun Dhawan makes a patriotic reference to the Prime Minister. In all of Akshay Kumar's films, in Airlift, in Rustam, there's some patriotic element, either the national anthem or the Indian flag rising or something like that. Again, a complete non-engagement with what's happening in the country.
Right.
So
But you do have some cinema that does attempt to address these topics, but that's primarily indie cinema, which we also cover, right? So movies like Court or, or even like Urta Punjab or something like that does actually sort of look at,
it does.
larger...
I mean, Urta Punjab, I think, sort of deserves credit for tackling the drug crisis in Punjab and how involved the political dispensation is in drug trade.
Yeah.
You know, so it does. I mean, it's not a great film for other reasons, for creative reasons, but I mean, yeah, you have to give them credit for tackling this and doing it in a. I mean, it's a fairly populist film, so it would get bums on seats. Yeah, so there are some films that do raise larger questions, but
so I think the job of the critic is basically to sort of be that guy in the corner who keeps shouting when nobody's listening, but it's important that somebody says this because, you know, if nobody was pointing out stuff like, you know, why are we suddenly seeing this sort of jingoistic wave through cinema recently? It's especially when you look at it in the larger context of what's happening with the censor board, you know, that there is clearly a very subtle kind of sort of move to sort of bow down to the to sort of the government
absolutely.
and to let them, you know that we're on your side, you know, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
To sort of
I mean, and it's kind of ridiculous because there's been so much tension between the censor board and between the film industry. But Amit, do you want to talk about reviewing gigs?
Yeah, you know, I had a question actually. I feel like that's like the hardest thing because the gig is over. What are you telling people? Because the music is completely your genre that you want to see, right? So what do you say in a gig review?
Well, I mean, I would again, you know, not only because we are kind of like we said, we're a very small team. When you talk about genre, I wouldn't, for instance, review an electronic music gig or a metal gig because those are not genres that I'm that familiar with. I mean, I think because electronic music, I will with time perhaps become familiar with it because those are the majority of the gigs that are going on nowadays. Metal has never been a genre that I've been really into. So, but when it comes to it, I think we primarily review music festivals because they are about the music, but they're also a lot about a whole bunch of other things. And so, you know, when you talk, you're talking about the entire experience, not just about the bands that are playing. So that's why, and so we primarily review music festivals and gigs by international acts, so like really big ticket international acts. We don't review like regular gigs because, you know, they're like plays, they happen week after week, and it's just sort of impossible to keep track. And you know, I think with gigs, it's one of the reasons that you. It's like you reviewing a restaurant, right? I mean, what do you write about? You write about what stood out, what sort of you remember. What are the sort of memories that you'll have after that, whether they're good or bad? And
but it has a lot to do with the ambience and the venue and the acoustics.
Well, if you're talking about all of those sort of things come into play, right? So if you have an uncomfortable venue, like for instance Richardson Crudis, which was one of the venues that was very popular until recently, I found that every time a big festival or a gig was held there, I had a pretty not so great experience. I mean, the band might have been great, but the experience was not so great. And because it was just a bad choice of venue, it didn't have proper ventilation, it was crowded, it wasn't great logistically in terms of, you know, getting in and out of the place. And you had like neighbors who had a problem with it because the sound would filter off and all that kind of stuff. So I think all those things come into play: the venue, the you know, the ambience. If it's like a music festival that stretches over days, and you also want to take into consideration the kind of food that was there, you know, the kind of crowd, the crowd control and the sort of crowd navigation. There are a whole bunch of things that come into play there. And then, of course, with the festival, it's very important to look at the programming because that would be a main thing, that, you know, how well have they programmed this, how is it a nice balance of newer acts and established acts, and, you know.
So you're going to be reviewing the NH7 Weekender this year?
Well, I think that I'm really curious to know about what the venue is. I've been doing it now ever since there was the past 6 editions. So the 7th edition is going to be in a new venue, so I'm kind of curious to know.
And this is a surprise venue, right? They haven't revealed it yet.
They haven't revealed the venue yet, but we do know that it's going to be in Pune, but it's going to be a camping festival, so it's going to probably be in a sort of large ground, you know, that kind of thing.
Okay, so that's it for Pow Bites, and we'll be back next week.
For more on what's happening in the city, read thedailypao.com. Also subscribe to our newsletter on the website. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're The Daily Pao. And you can find this podcast on the Indus Vox Media SoundCloud page, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn.
If you like listening to the podcast, you can also check out Cyrus Says, hosted by the Cyrus Brocha. It's an irreverent podcast on current events, urban India, politics, sports, civic sense, traffic, kids, food, and everything that matters. Well, mostly.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Sorry to say, but there's been a slight delay due to the apocalypse having suddenly begun. As you can see, there's death, destruction, and chaos taking place all around us. But don't you worry, food and drinks will be served shortly, and I would recommend checking out
IVM Podcasts
to get some of your favorite Indian podcasts. We'll keep you going till this whole thing blows over. Thank you.